Good afternoon, Year 9, or indeed good morning, because you might be watching this in the morning. I don't care. So, creation ex nihilo. We are going to be looking at that in a little bit of detail today. I know you've already done some stuff with Seneca, but I just want to cover a couple of these big topics from Origins and Meanings before we move on into good and evil. Okay, so hopefully you've got some pen and paper in front of you already. If you want to be using your books, that's fine. Go ahead. I'll just give you a little minute now, and you can even pause the video and go and find your book if you don't have it. Okay. Right. I imagine most of you have found the pause button by now. So let's move on. Right, to begin with, I'd like to do a quick recap quiz. So get the page in the back of your book right now. And you don't need to write out the answers. You can. It's just multiple choice. It's only 3 questions. So here is the first one. Who formulated the Big Bang Theory? Who first formulated the Big Bang Theory? Albert Einstein, Pope John Paul II, Stephen Hawking, or Father Georges Lemaitre? Hopefully you have correctly answered. D, Father Georges Lemaitre, Catholic priest, Belgian astrophysicist. We will briefly talk about him today, actually. Okay. Number 2, how do Catholics interpret the Bible? Literally, metaphorically, according to each section's literary style and intention, or according to the guidance of the Holy Spirit to the individual reading the Bible? The answer to that question is C, according to each section's literary style and intention. So A would be a fundamentalist Protestant. B is not really anybody, but I wanted to put that in there because some of you might think, oh, well, Catholics only interpret the Bible metaphorically, but that's definitely not true because there are plenty of parts of the Bible that we do take literally. For example, the Gospels. These are accounts of Jesus's life. We treat them as if they are historical accounts because they're written as historical accounts and they're intended to be read in that way. Hence, the correct answer being that we interpret the Bible according to the literary style and intention of that section. I put section because, well, yes, a whole book in the Bible is a kind of a section, but sometimes those books are made up of different styles within the book, so can be a little bit more nuanced than that. Finally, D would be pretty much your kind of average liberal Protestant, anybody who thinks that we can just kind of interpret for ourselves and, you know, the Holy Spirit will guide us in some way. Not the Catholic position, although clearly the Holy Spirit does have a role to play in everything. Finally, number 3, a hopefully reasonably easy one. What does pro-life mean? What does pro-life mean? I'll give you a little minute to answer that. Well, the answer to that one is, of course, A, in favour of banning abortion. That would certainly be Catholics. But there are plenty of atheists who are, in fact, pro-life as well. We probably won't look at that topic again now, but I just thought I'd make sure you've got at least some of the terminology right. Okay, good. So, creation ex nihilo. We're going to look at 3 particular things today. First off, we're going to look at 4 possible explanations for the existence of the universe. How is it that we have ended up with something rather than nothing? I know we have asked that question a lot before we broke up. So I promise you the answers that we come to here are going to be slightly different to what you've heard before. Then we're going to look in a little more detail at the doctrine of creation ex nihilo in Catholic Christianity, and particularly the ideas of St Augustine. Then once we've done that, we will explore how to answer a C task on creation ex nihilo, and then that will be your job for today, is to write a C task for me. And don't worry, because I've basically done the whole thing for you, so you're just going to have to write it out longhand. So I'm hoping that that will be helpful for you, so that you'll understand how to do a C task, because it's been a while, and I'll get loads and loads of really good answers off you. Right. Creation. So we need to just think a little bit about, what do we mean by creation? Where do things come from? We're in a world that is made up of things that are made up of other things. It's all a bit like a cake, right? Somebody got a bunch of ingredients, mixed them up, and ta-da, here's a cake. They're made of something else. You know, you've got flour, you've got eggs, you got whatever those sprinkled things are. Everything comes from something else. But clearly that answer can't keep going backwards forever. We're gonna sort of look at that as a thought in a little while. The universe is bigger than that, isn't it? Right? I mean, the universe we can get down to certain physical ingredients, if you like, quarks and electrons and boson particles, all sorts of things. But ultimately, all of it had to come from somewhere. So it's not quite the same thing as our cake, right? We're going to end up at a point where we need to ask ourselves, well, okay, where did that come from? So what about the universe? Does the universe correspond to our ordinary understanding of how we create things, that we create things out of other stuff? Why is there a universe at all? How did existence begin? What is the universe made of? You know, where did all this stuff come from? Where did matter itself? We can say that, you know, when we get down to it, my little Pritt stick here and my totally unnecessary hat stand, this book, they're all made up of different things. But if you ask a physicist, what are these things made of? They're going to tell you, yeah, well, electrons, protons, neutrons, the building blocks of the universe, if you like, are actually fundamentally all the same thing. So where did all that come from? Why is there a universe at all? So we're going to deal with 4 possible explanations for this, and I've tried to give them names. Some of those names you're not going to like. I'm just going to tell you now there, but I want you to learn this terminology. So I'm actually going to ask you to write these down. So maybe if we can just write down, why is there a universe at all? And then 4 possible explanations. Just give you a second to do that. So, 4 possible explanations for the existence of the universe, where it came from, how it began. So, the first idea we can call pantheism, the idea that God is everywhere in the universe, that God is the universe, an eternal, timeless God existed before the universe, and he made the universe from his own substance, that the universe itself is made up of God, that they are inseparable, that actually God is the universe. So that's pantheism. Definitely not a Christian idea. I want to emphasize that. Okay, I do not want people getting confused. This is not Christianity at all. There we go. So number 2. So you can, for the first one, you can literally just write the word pantheism, and then we're going to look at that in more detail in a minute. But pantheism. Number 2, an eternal God existed before the universe, and he made the universe out of nothing. Ex nihilo. That's what ex nihilo means, out of nothing. There was nothing there. God made something from nothing. That is the Catholic position, and we'll look at that in a bit. Third possible option, just the universe was always there. It's got no beginning. It just kind of goes back forever into eternity. So not, a long time, forever. No beginning, and presumably also no end at the other end of it. This is known sometimes as steady state theory, the idea that the universe has always been in existence. Finally, our fourth possible explanation. I told you weren't going to like it. Metaphysical naturalism. Metaphysical naturalism. Just copy that down carefully, and I will break that up for you in a second. Metaphysical naturalism. Just give you a second to write that down. Okay, so metaphysics in philosophy is the study of what things there are. What is there? What is there that exists? Now, and naturalism is the idea that everything can be reduced to natural explanations, to natural causes, as in physical causes. So metaphysical naturalism is a kind of fancy philosophical way of saying that nothing exists except the universe, that the only stuff that exists is physical stuff. Therefore, the explanation coming from a position of metaphysical naturalism is that, well, the universe just kind of came into being out of nothing with no cause. This is the classic atheist position that we've talked a fair amount about before. Okay, so we're going to look at these in a little more detail. Pantheism. Again, I would like to emphasize, not a Christian viewpoint. You can see I've got a little picture of Yoda here for good reason, because basically this is the Force. This is a kind of Star Wars idea. It's not, well, I'm trying to think if there's any serious, yeah, there are a few people who think like this, but it's not a huge idea. So God is not transcendent. This is a kind of clearly, so they kind of believe in a God, they're sort of like this, but it's not the same as the Christian God. The Christian God is a personal God. He's got, he is a being, and he is definitely transcendent, whereas pantheists say no, God is not transcendent. God is both in and actually is the structure of the universe, that there is no difference. The universe and God are one. A bit like the Force in Star Wars. So there's just this sort of, just like a mystical sense that there's more to life, but without thinking much more seriously than that. You can tell I'm not a big fan. And there are a few problems that we should probably deal with about this problem. Maybe that's a better place for me to be, I don't know. So it causes all kinds of problems. For example, well, okay, if we're going to say that God is eternal and he's sort of outside of space and time, well, how can he be if he's completely inseparable from the universe, which is, which has space and time. Space and time derive themselves from the universe. They are qualities of the universe, if you like. So if God is caught up in the universe, well, then he must be surely caught up in space and time too. He must be getting older, right, as time goes on. That sort of doesn't sound like God to me. That just sounds like, they're talking about the universe. Right, we want to say, most of the time, we want to say that God is good. And if we mean anything by the word God, then we sort of mean, well, that all-powerful, transcendent, eternal, good thing that causes the universe to be. But if God is the universe, well, then we struggle to explain how he could be good. How can God be good if he is also cancer, nuclear weapons, the Holocaust, and even Joe Exotic? Doesn't make sense. All of these horrific things, if you believe the pantheists, all of these horrible things are also God. Doesn't work. Icky. Or at the same time, we want to be free. We think we're free, don't we? So if we're free, well, if God is acting through me, if God is me, I am God, and everything else around me is God, well, I'm not very free. It's somehow sort of, he must be directing things completely without any gap, at which point then my free will comes into question a little bit. So all in all, it sort of boils down to, as Richard Dawkins says, sexed up atheism. We're just being a bit sentimental about the universe. We're just kind of saying, oh, well, yeah, here is the universe. And, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we kind of called it God? But it doesn't really mean much to say it. There's no consequences to it. It doesn't require much of us. And in fact, it starts to kind of question whether or not we're free. The goodness of God comes into question. So all in all, pretty terrible idea. So here we have our second idea. This is the Catholic idea. This should start to feel a little bit more familiar. Okay, so the universe began in one single creative act at the beginning of all time. I just want to pause there for a second. That idea is actually quite radical. Look around you. If you just lived without having been told an awful lot about the origins of the universe and astronomy and all the rest of it, if you just looked around you, the stars don't move. They don't move. You look up in the sky, and okay, we can see that from day to day, they're in a position that's slightly different relative to us, but we see that between them, they actually are fixed. We're the ones sort of moving around, looking up at them, okay? But the stars themselves stay fixed in their spots, and it's just us kind of wobbling around them. Things seem to be pretty stable. The laws of nature just kind of go on. There's no, if we just take our lived experience, there's no reason for us to think that anything had a beginning at all. We might, and many people have in the past, we might just think that time is just kind of this circle, that things are born, they die, and then they're born again and die again, and we just kind of go round and round and round and round and round, just following the laws of nature. And then it doesn't really have any beginning or an end. This is what we'll come on to in a minute with the steady state idea. It's kind of a natural idea. So this thought that the Christians have, and the Jews for that matter, that the universe began in one single creative act, well, it didn't come to us initially through any kind of observation of the world around us. It was revealed. Now, you've just done a little bit about Revelation and the Bible and how we relate to the Bible, so I'm hoping that word is now rich in meaning for you. Revelation, that that God shows himself to us in ways that we can't understand unless he reveals himself to us, that this revelation is necessary for us to get to a deeper knowledge of God and of ourselves. However, as we've seen, or as we will see, this single creative act is backed up now by scientific evidence, but it's actually pretty recent. The Big Bang Theory only really started to become established kind of scientific fact in sort of the 1960s. So we mustn't for any moment think that this is an obvious thought. It's not. It kind of had to be revealed to us. Right, so we've said space and time are part of the universe. And the Greek philosopher Aristotle takes this thought and pushes it to its limits. And he says, okay, well, space and time are part of the universe. And that means that one thing following on from another is a sort of a natural part of the universe. But it doesn't make sense to say that it just has always been that way, that there's just like this infinite regress, this kind of constant, you can just go back and back and back and back, this chain of dominoes that we've talked about before. He says it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make sense to us. We sort of intuitively reject this idea. The universe, Aristotle says, must have had a cause outside of itself, transcendent of space and time, that set it all into motion. Something that was what he calls an unmoved mover. An unmoved mover. Write that little phrase down, please, because that's a really important one. As in something that does not have a beginning, that is transcendent of the idea of beginnings and ends, that is unmoved, but he moves everything else. He pushes everything else into being. This is one of Aristotle's big ideas. That the universe must have had a cause outside of itself, and we can start to see this in the Big Bang. It's sort of a logical step. Okay, so we start to put some of these thoughts together. We've got revelations showing us that God is outside the universe, and then we've got Aristotle saying, well, there must be something outside the universe to create things. So, well, here we are. God, outside the universe, creates the universe, but leaves it free to do its things, run its course. So this sort of preserves human freedom. God is the transcendent, omnipotent creator of everything, but he's separate from the universe. This goes against the idea of pantheism. Not the same thing as the universe, because clearly it's not. Some bits of the universe are pretty bad. Some things that happen in the universe are pretty bad. That couldn't be if the universe was God. So it must be separate, and it must have been left free to some degree to kind of do its thing. This thought, there's a reason I'm emphasizing this now, because we're about to move into good and evil. And we must start to understand that creation is separate to God. He has kind of kicked it off, and yes, he dips in and out and intervenes and can sort of gently nudge us all over the place, but fundamentally we are free to act in ways that make sense to us, but there are also consequences to us. Right, we'll leave that thought there for now. Okay, so then where did all this stuff come from? The universe is not the same thing as God. So, well, what else was there? We're going to come on to this idea in a little bit, but fundamentally, he's so powerful, he doesn't need to create from anything. He's just made it out of nothing. So yeah, the Big Bang Theory, Father Georges Lemaitre in the 20th century, he's a Belgian astrophysicist and Catholic priest. And he first kind of initiates this idea that the universe must have started in the Big Bang. And he starts to kind of pull together the scientific proof for why this must have been the case. And so Catholics are quite comfortable with this idea. And we would say, well, yeah, watching the Big Bang, studying the scientific effects of the Big Bang, all of this is an observation of God's act of creation, ex nihilo, out of nothing. Okay. 3, I'll briefly touch on this. This is not a big idea. But it certainly was. So initially, when atheists heard Father Georges Lemaitre's ideas, they sort of thought, that sounds a bit religious. They rejected the Big Bang Theory. They really didn't like it. What they said was, well, the universe has just always been there. Shush, don't ask questions. If it's expanding, then it's just adding more of the same of what was already there. So it's not pushing out from one point and getting bigger. It's just sort of here, and then a little bit more adds, and then a little bit more adds, and it just keeps replicating itself. But that's kind of their way of trying to explain the expansion that they're starting to observe in the mid-20th century. But fundamentally, it's a terrible idea, and it's been completely trashed by modern science. And they've had to then back down and say, okay, fine then, Big Bang Theory, even though it sounds totally religious. So I'm kind of emphasizing this because it's ironic, because a lot of people seem to think that somehow the Big Bang Theory proves religion wrong, when in fact, most atheists, if you'd have asked them in sort of 1930, 1940, what they thought about the Big Bang Theory, they'd have said, man, those wacky Catholics, they're just trying to justify their silly stuff from Genesis. It's a load of rubbish. So it's science that has backed the atheists into a corner, not the other way around. Which brings us neatly into metaphysical naturalism. So after they finally accepted the validity of the Big Bang Theory, atheists have now had to fall back to this kind of position where they say, well, okay, find the Big Bang. And then they have to, if you start to quiz them on, well, what started the Big Bang, then they're forced to say, well, it just came out of nothing for no reason, with no cause, because that's all they've got. So, right, metaphysical naturalism is the absolute denial of any spiritual realities. It says that nothing exists except for the physical universe, that there's no meaning, no purpose to existence. We're just here. There's just stuff, just physical objects bouncing around, and anything else is either an illusion or just us kind of kidding ourselves, or it's kind of an evolutionary quirk that didn't have to be here. And they prove this by saying, well, look at the world. Observe the physical universe. Have a look. Can you see anything other than the physical universe? No. Therefore, it doesn't exist. So and the problem is, this is a circular argument. They say nothing exists outside the physical universe, so I will only accept evidence from the physical universe. I'm going to go and look at the physical universe. Can I see anything else there? No, I can't. Well done, I'm right. But it's basically a religious position with no backing. There's no reason for it. There's no sense in it necessarily. It's just kind of knee-jerk. Well, we don't believe in God, therefore we have to reject any evidence other than physical evidence. Okay, so then, well, they've accepted that the Big Bang happened. That there was this kind of dense, hot ball that was compacted together with all the matter in the universe, all the energy in the universe, all kind of crushed into one thing, not crushed because it was, well, you know what I mean. It's all there, and it was so intensely full of energy that it couldn't keep itself together, and it explodes outwards. Fine. And they say, yes, all the evidence shows this, finally. If you ask them, where does that come from? Well, okay, here we have Stephen Hawking. His answer is, well, gravity. Gravity caused the universe to create itself from nothing. well, okay, Stephen, where does gravity come from? Because you're saying that it came out of nothing. Well, gravity isn't nothing, is it? And also gravity has to be acting on matter for it to be of any meaningful understanding of what gravity is. You know, it has to be acting on something. So you need matter and you need gravity to begin with. And then we're just talking about, fine, okay, you've got the first second of the Big Bang or whatever. That doesn't tell us what started that process. Where did the gravity come from? Where did the matter come from? So again, kind of a circular argument. If you push them, ultimately, they're just going to have to say, we don't know, it's just there. It just started. The universe is just here now. And we can't observe before it, so we don't know. Okay, I would like you now to pause the video and from memory answer the two questions on the screen. What does creation ex nihilo mean? And just to name the four alternative explanations of the existence of the universe. Try not to use your notes, try and do it on the back of your books or something like that. Those four alternative explanations for the existence of the universe. Right, I'm going to pause, well, you're going to pause it now. Okay, so hopefully you have now finished that. We can look at the answers. So, first one, pretty straightforward. Hopefully you've all got this one right. Creation ex nihilo, or nihilo, means creation out of nothing. The four alternative explanations for the existence of the universe. If you've literally just put the words, the names of them, or some little brief summary of them, that's absolutely fine. The first one is pantheism. God is the universe. Secondly, creation ex nihilo. God transcends the universe that he created. He makes it out of nothing. Thirdly, steady state theory, the idea that the universe has always been there and never came out of anything. And finally, metaphysical naturalism that says that there's no spiritual causes, no purpose to the world. Everything has to be explained entirely by physical processes. Great. Okay, so I'll just give you a little minute to copy down any extra bits. So if you want to pause again, that's fine. Okay, so moving on with our little second section, creation ex nihilo in Catholic Christianity. So we've looked at the four possible explanations, and now I want to dig down a little bit more into this Catholic idea of creation ex nihilo. Where does it come from, first of all, and then how is it that St Augustine, in particular, expands on that, and then we'll get on to that question that we've got at the end. Okay, so I thought I'd just start with the first three verses of the entire Bible. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So this is how God kicks off creation. We have the first three words emphasize to us that there is a beginning, that there is no steady state theory, that everything has a beginning. And then we see this earth was a formless void. Well, what's a form? It's the shape. So there's no shape, formless, it has no shape, and void, it's empty. So this is kind of biblical language for nothingness. There is nothing. And it's not just nothing, it's dark nothing. And all we have is what is known as the deep, which we could sort of understand as the kind of the potential, the bubbling possibilities. of what's going to come, of the creation, and this wind from God, which is often understood as the Holy Spirit, wind and breath and spirit. We've maybe talked about this before. God says, "Let there be light," and there is light. God creates through the power of speech. That's the only thing he uses. Let there be light, and there was light. So, things we learn from this. Well, obviously, we see that he is omnipotent. He is all powerful. He has complete control over everything. He makes it just through his will to make things. It is made out of nothing, ex nihilo. God creates with the word. Again, something that we're going to look at a little bit more when we look at good and evil. The word, the logos. We have talked about this actually before. The ordering principle of God's mind, we could say. God gives being and order to creation through his speech. And then finally, God is separate from his creation. He's transcendent of it. Okay, so he has made it with his sort of speech. He is completely powerful over it, and he's also outside it. There's no kind of confusion between God and his creation. These two are separate. Okay, so here we have St Augustine. So he kind of develops some of these ideas, and he tries to make sense of them in a more theological sense, in a kind of in a deeper way. St Augustine wrote a book called The Confessions. He wrote several books, one of which was called The Confessions, between 397 and 400 AD. Confessions is one of the first autobiographies. It's also probably one of the greatest works of Western literature. It's a very, very important book, and gives us an amazing insight into the mind and the experiences of this, well, at the time, relatively young man living in ancient Roman times. So towards the end of the book, he kind of moves away from the autobiographical stuff and starts this kind of meditation on the nature of God and how he relates to creation. And we're going to see, he is the kind of, I've been talking a little bit about this combination between Catholics using revelation on one hand and also using our reason and our observations, so we can think about things. We have the revelation of God through the scriptures and through the church, but we also have a mind. We've been given a mind. We should use it. We've been given senses. We should use those to learn about the world. And so Augustine tries to kind of combine all of these things to consider the nature of God and creation. One little side note that's quite interesting about Augustine that I think is relevant, well, very relevant. Augustine did not read Genesis literally. He read Genesis in the Catholic way. He said, this is telling us something about God, and it's probably telling us something about ourselves, but it's not supposed to be read literally. I don't think this all happened in 6 days. He rejects the whole 6 days creation thing. So again, there's a sense that people tend to think of the way that Catholics say, oh, well, we don't read that literally. People hear that and they go, oh, yeah, well, because science has proved you wrong, so you're kind of trying to backpedal a bit. No. St. Augustine, who's writing, 300 years after Jesus was around, and already has a notion, has some strong sense that we're not supposed to read this story as literally true. So we mustn't think that Catholics are kind of somehow on the back foot when we talk about this. This is a long-standing tradition. This is a kind of a normal part of the way that Catholics do theology. Okay, so what does Augustine say about creation ex nihilo? Well, I'm going to go line by line because this is dense stuff. I've tried to turn it a little bit into ordinary language from Augustine's words, but basically this is a quote from him. So he says, You, O Lord, made something in the beginning, and you created it out of nothing. So there was nothing, and then there was something, and that's all we need to know. You know, Augustine clearly, nearly 2,000 years ago, doesn't know about the Big Bang Theory. He doesn't know about the kind of complex physics and astronomical observations. He doesn't need to. All he knows is there was a beginning, and before it there was nothing, and then after it there was something. Okay, what is this something? Well, where does it come from? He says, you created heaven and earth, but you did not make them of your own substance. So we need to maybe back up a little second here. Augustine, we're just going to take the fact that God exists and that God made the universe for granted for a second. Okay, so you're God, and you decide to make yourself a universe. Well, you've got two choices. You can make the universe from your own substance, out of yourself, out of God, or you can make it out of nothing. This is kind of implicit in Augustine's argument here. There's only really those two choices. There's nothing else around. There's no sort of second substance. There is only one substance, and it is God. He is the only thing in being. Nothing else exists. So if you're going to create, he either makes out of himself or he doesn't. That's it. So Augustine says, well, you didn't make it out of yourself. Why not, Augustine? Well, because if you'd have done so, if God had, he's addressing God, you is God. If you, God, had done so, then heaven and earth, they would have been equal to your Son, Jesus Christ, and therefore equal to yourself. Because Jesus Christ is made out of the substance of God. He is one in substance with God. He is fully human, but he's also fully divine, fully God. Well, again, this is something that we're going to move on to soon. Jesus is God. God is Jesus. So they are equal. They are consubstantial, as we say in the Nicene Creed. They are made of one substance. Okay. So God has made something out of his own substance, but it wasn't the universe. It was Jesus. Now, okay, let's have a little thought experiment here. Augustine is saying, let's pretend for a minute that he does make the universe out of his own substance. Well, then we have Jesus, who we know is made out of God's substance, but we've also got the universe made out of God's substance. Well, then we need to understand this whole thing about Joe Exotic again, don't we? Because there is plenty of stuff in the universe that is definitely not equal to God, that is definitely pretty bad. So that would mean then that somehow, if that's true of this other thing that is made out of God's substance, well, then we would surely be saying that Jesus somehow isn't all good. Then everything falls apart. So it cannot be. It wouldn't be right. Augustine says justice would not be served if the universe was equal to God. And at the same time, well, if it's not made out of his substance, then it wouldn't. Then it's not equal to him. But there wasn't anything else to create from. So, yeah, okay. We've established that the universe is definitely not equal to God, that it is not as good, that it doesn't have as much power or value as Jesus Christ, or indeed of God the Father himself. But there's nothing else around. Therefore, the only thought that is logically possible is that God must have created heaven and earth, as in the universe. This is Augustine's phrase for the universe. He must have created the universe out of nothing. Okay, another little moment to just reflect and pull some of this together. So I'd like you to pause and answer these two questions. Number one, what two aspects of God's nature are highlighted by the Genesis accounts of creation ex nihilo? And second, why does St Augustine reject the notion that God made the universe out of his own substance? So why is it that he says God cannot have made the universe from himself? Okay, so pause the video, please, and answer those two questions now. Okay, so let's move forward. We'll check those answers. So number one, which two aspects of God's nature are highlighted by the Genesis accounts of creation ex nihilo? Well, that would be transcendence and omnipotence. If you've put the word or logos or something like that, that's okay too, but these were the two that I was sort of looking for there. And then secondly, why does St. Augustine reject the notion that God made the universe out of his own substance? Well, this is because anything made of God's substance would have to be equal to God, but only Jesus can claim that. The universe is clearly not perfect in the way that Jesus was, so it can't be equal to him. Hopefully that makes sense to you. If not, drop me an email. In fact, do it now. Pause the video right now and send me an email asking me to explain that again, and I will do my best to do so. I'm going to give you a little minute in case you're confused. Cool. Okay. Right. You've been dreading it, but here it is. We are going to do a C task. This is going to be easy, I promise, because I have made sure that it will be. So write this question down now, please. Explain beliefs about creation ex nihilo from a Catholic and a non-religious viewpoint. Give you a little minute to pause the video and write that down. Okay, so I wanted to just recap how it is that we answer C task, because it's been a while and I certainly haven't given you a huge amount of guidance on that recently, so I thought we should just go over it quickly now. So normally speaking, there are lots of different, well, there are two main ways that you might get asked a C task, but so I've tried to come up with a rule that counts, that applies to both. So basically, I want to say one paragraph per viewpoint. So you'll be sometimes asked to give 3 details or explain 3 ways or something like that. But generally speaking, it's either that or it's discuss this topic, explain beliefs from a Catholic viewpoint and another religious viewpoint, or Catholic and a non-religious, something like that. So this is clearly going to be a 2-paragraph answer, 2 viewpoints, 2 paragraphs. They might be quite long paragraphs, that's up to you, but we need to have one viewpoint dealt with in one paragraph and then another one dealt in another. Try and use as much specialist vocabulary as you can. Use at least one source of authority for each viewpoint, and try and link sources of authorities to core beliefs, and then those core beliefs to attitudes or to the sort of answer to the question. And we are going to walk through this process now. So if none of that makes sense to you, hopefully in a minute it will, having gone through the examples from today. Right, before we do that, I'm pretty sure this bit is relatively straightforward for you. Feel free to go back over your notes if you would like to. Feel free to make a note of where we are so far in the video, and then skip back through the video and find some of those sections that you need if you didn't make notes earlier. I would like you to make a note from a Catholic perspective and from a non-religious perspective, that's the atheists or the metaphysical naturalists that we've been talking about, all the same thing really. I would like you to note down specialist vocab and sources of authority that you could use. Well, you'll have 4 separate lists in the end, won't you? Because you'll have specialist vocab, Catholic and non-religious, and then source of authority, Catholic and non-religious. So spend a little time going through your notes now, please, and writing down those 2 lists. Okay, go. Okay, so hopefully you've got a decent few lists there. It shouldn't be majorly long. Let's find out. These are the ones that I think touch on at least the basics that you need to have covered. So vocab, Catholic, and there's a certain amount of overlap here, so don't freak out if there are differences. Catholics, you're going to be talking about omnipotent, transcendent. You might want to bring in the word, the Big Bang Theory, revelation, reason. On the atheist side, you might want to talk about steady state theory. You certainly want to bring in metaphysical naturalism. That's going to tick a big box for showing off your fancy technical knowledge. And again, the Big Bang Theory. If you've put other things in there and you're not sure about them, fire me off an email and I will tell you. Again, well, maybe we'll pause at the end of having done the sources of authority and you can send me that email then. But feel free to quiz me on that. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so source of authority then. Catholics, well, we're definitely going to talk about Genesis 1. St Augustine, please tell me you put St Augustine in there, having just talked about him. Father Georges Lemaitre, clearly going to be relevant. You might, if you were really paying attention, you might have chucked in Aristotle there too, but he's not Catholic, so that's I can forgive you if you haven't put that in. He has ideas that Catholics have used, but he was born before Jesus Christ, so not a Catholic and not even a Jew. So don't worry about him if you haven't got him. Then atheists, well, we're going to talk about Stephen Hawking. You might also have mentioned Richard Dawkins. He's going to be relevant. I sort of threw him in because we can talk about his general ideas about atheism. The problem with atheism, of course, is that it doesn't really have sources of authority in the same way that Catholicism does. One atheist might love Richard Dawkins and another one might not, and that's their choice because it's ultimately just kind of, whatever you reckon. As long as you don't believe in God, ta-da, you're an atheist. Okay, so there's not that kind of unifying sort of central place where people get their ideas from in the same way as you do in Christianity. Right, so I'm going to pause a little second. If you want to email me about any of those problems now, any kind of topics that you threw in there that you're not sure if you should have, vocab, source of authority, things like that, go. Okay. I've gone through now, oh dear me. I'm going to hide that for a second. So we're going to now break up. So if you see here, I have asked you to come up with specialist vocab. We have got our sources of authority. Now we need to start linking those sources of authority to core beliefs and those beliefs to our answers to the question. Well, I thought it might be wise to start with to actually identify what those core beliefs are. Now, rather than asking you to do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a hand here because that's trickier than it might sound at first. So let's look on the left-hand side of this table for now at the Catholic core beliefs. So we find out from Genesis. Genesis reveals to us that everything began in one single act of creation by a transcendent, omnipotent God. This is then backed up by reason. So we have this idea that you can't keep going back forever. That's Aristotle. And scientific observation, which has led us to this understanding of the Big Bang. So the real sort of core belief there is that everything began in one single act of creation, and that God did it. So what else do we believe as a kind of basic belief that is relevant to this question? Well, we certainly believe that nothing existed before the universe began except for God. So this is then, we're sort of delving into St Augustine here. God existed, but nothing else did. If something is equal to God, then it is God. So Jesus is equal to God. He is God. God is perfect. So if something is equal to God, then it must be perfect too. So there's a sort of an elaboration on that idea. Jesus is equal to God. He is perfect. And finally, everything in time and space has a cause. So these are just kind of thrown out. There's no particular order necessarily in these core beliefs, but we'll see in a minute how they all kind of hang together when we tailor it into an argument, an answer to this question. Right, let's have a look on the right-hand side now of that table, the atheists. So one of their core beliefs is metaphysical naturalism, a denial of any spiritual explanations. Fundamentally, they have no reason to think that, they just do. It's hard to back it up. They would say, well, if we cannot directly observe something, then it doesn't exist. God cannot be directly observed by science, therefore he doesn't exist. And they also say, well, we can't observe what happened before the Big Bang. So those are just the core ideas. We're now going to kind of see how we can use those core ideas to kind of join the dots between the sources of authority and the attitudes or the answers to these questions. Okay, so we're now going to go from left to right along the screen. So we've got Genesis, our source of authority. This is just for Catholics, okay? So our source of authority is Genesis. And from that, we get the belief that God is omnipotent and transcendent. This leads us to an understanding, or to a sort of sense, that God has no cause. He simply is. So nothing began God. He's transcendent of the idea of beginnings. God has no cause. He simply is. Now, reason tells us, and we could also say Aristotle tells us, if that would be an easier use of a source of authority, that everything in time and space has a cause, but you can't keep going back forever. There needs to be what Aristotle calls an unmoved mover. Therefore, so when we move from a belief into the attitude, we're sort of saying therefore. Therefore, the universe must have a transcendent cause, which is God. So the universe has to have had some beginning, and it has to have had a beginning outside of itself, which must have been God, something transcendent. Now, we can call it whatever we like, but ultimately the easiest word is God. St Augustine, so we're just recapping at this point. St Augustine says, well, only God existed before the universe, so he either made it from himself or ex nihilo, out of nothing. If God had made the universe from his own substance, it would be equal to him. But it's not perfect, and God is perfect, so this can't be. Therefore, under attitude, God must have made the universe ex nihilo, because he couldn't have made it from his own substance. So that's a sort of a little, you can string those ideas together to form part of your paragraph. So if you're a little bit lost at the moment, hopefully the individual ideas make sense to you, and this is all familiar because it's really just recap. Here we have on the page basically your plan for your Catholic paragraph. So if you move from here to here to here, and then to the next line, and you go source of authority, belief, attitude, and you just string those together into a sentence or two, and then again and again, then you will have a very, very well-structured paragraph. So science then tells us, finally, at the end of this table, science, specifically Father Georges Lemaitre, tells us that the universe began in a Big Bang, a single moment of creation ex nihilo. Now, you can, by all means, go into a lot of detail about how the Big Bang worked, all this compression of energy and blah, blah, blah. That's fine. This Therefore, Catholics see the Big Bang as direct scientific evidence to support the ancient Christian belief that God created the universe ex nihilo. Bear in mind, I'm writing this to get you, full marks. Okay, so this is a very, very comprehensive answer. Right, atheists. Atheists are going to say, well, we don't have a source of authority here, but we're going to chuck in Richard Dawkins because he's an atheist and he definitely thinks this, so that's good enough for us. Richard Dawkins believes metaphysical naturalism, the denial of any spiritual explanations. Therefore, only direct observations of the universe, also known as science, are acceptable forms of evidence. Dawkins would go on to say that if we cannot directly observe something, it doesn't exist. We cannot directly observe God in the universe. Therefore, God doesn't exist. So this is the kind of the circularity of the atheist argument, but regardless, this is the atheist's argument that, well, we reject spiritual explanations, therefore we can only accept physical explanations, as in science. Science can't observe God, therefore God doesn't exist. So you have the choice here. You don't have to throw in this whole thing about 20th century atheists, but I think it's a nice little touch. And it shows a kind of a depth and a breadth of knowledge here. 20th century atheists would have said that the Big Bang Theory sounded too religious. They found that this single moment of creation was a very Christian idea, and they didn't like it. It was icky. It's religious. No, we don't like this idea. They would have therefore been much more in favour of steady state theory, this idea that the universe must have always been there. And they did quite a lot of work desperately trying to shore up this idea until finally it fell apart and they couldn't hold it up anymore. And then they switched to the Big Bang. So Stephen Hawking is one of those who really then seriously started to formulate the Big Bang Theory. He's also an atheist. So he said, look, observations of the universe show us that there definitely was a Big Bang. We cannot escape this idea anymore. Therefore, the Big Bang Theory, probably true. But we can't observe what happened before the Big Bang. Now, if we can't observe something, it probably doesn't exist. So nothing existed before the universe, and only the universe exists now. Therefore, as Hawking would say, and the atheists would say, the universe must have created itself out of nothing. If you want to go into the whole thing about gravity there, you can, but again, bear in mind you're against the clock, and theoretically you're doing this 8-mark question in 8 minutes. I've kind of gone over every single little possible point in a lot of detail here. By the time you get to the exam, you'll know this stuff so well that you'll just be kind of churning them out very quickly. So just bear that in mind when you're adding all the details. You don't necessarily have to. Okay. So I have set up a form on Microsoft Teams that I would like you to fill in for this. By all means, practice it on paper if you like, but I want to receive your completed answers through Microsoft Teams. It just makes it easier for me to mark it and to look through them all and to make sure that everybody's done it. At this point, you can, well, in a minute, you can pause the video. I've given you not even sentence starters, paragraph starters. I've basically given you the first 2.5 sentences of your first paragraph and the first sentence of your second paragraph. If you want to reject those ideas, go for it. Although clearly that might be a risky move. But ideally use those as the beginning, and then you can use your, you can even kind of keep this on your screen while you're working, and use these 2 slides to help you answer the question. So again, if you're struggling, send me an email, that's absolutely fine. But at this point, that's the end of the video. So you might want to pause it in a second, just to give yourself time to copy down these sentence starters, and then crack on. Right. If enough people send me emails, I might turn it into a tutorial, and I'll invite you all to come and have a chat on Teams or something. But otherwise, I will see you all again next week. Right, take care.